If you missed last week, Chris was speaking on the first bit of this passage, but he also set the context. And if you weren't here last week, I just want to remind you of the context of this passage. This is the nation of Israel. It's about 700 years before Jesus was born. And this little nation is being threatened all the time, really, by, at this point in time, it's a superpower, it's Assyria. And we've already seen in Isaiah chapter 7, the king there is King Ahaz. And in chapter 7, he's advised by Isaiah, the prophet, who comes to him and says, listen, God's for you, he's with you, he will protect you, do not make a deal with any other nations. Of course, Ahaz doesn't really listen, and he ends up making a deal with other nations. And this nation really is in darkness. Okay, that's what this whole Isaiah chapter 9 is about. It's about a nation that is in darkness. They don't know how much time they have left before they potentially get ransacked. Okay, but Isaiah speaks in chapter 9 of a coming king. Okay, one who will be born, who will be like no other. A good and perfect ruler. Very unlike King Ahaz at the time. And so we have this small verse 6. I'm going to read that out. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Are we going to hear that as well? Where is Amel? Yeah. Do you want to just read it out in Farsi?
به ما پسری داده شده است و دولت بر دوش او خواهد بود. او فرا خوانده خواهد شد. مشاور عالی، خدای توانا، پدر ابدی، شاهزاده صلح.
Thank you. So we got to hear last week from Chris about, and we're just looking at these names, about the wonderful counselor, the mighty God. And he spoke about him not just being a stereotypical counselor, he's not just the all-knowing one who actually knows us better than we know ourselves and has all the wisdom that we will ever need, but he's the one who's mighty. He's the one who is able to act. He's the one who spoke things into being out of nothing. The one who's for us and the one who protects us. And today I want to focus literally just on the Prince of Peace. And you know, there are some, when you look at these names, there are some really bold claims made about the king who is to come. It feels like a real weight, actually. If you think about being named something, this is huge. He will be the Prince of Peace. What does that really mean? Certainly in our world today, as we look around, I think that this thing called peace, people would suggest they're searching for, they're looking for. We have John Lennon here, a little quote from him in his song, "Imagine all the people living in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one." That might be your view on world peace. It's just dreamland, cuckoo land. And you know, if I'm honest, as we look at the headlines out there today, we see nations at war, don't we? We've got Israel and Gaza who are in conflict. We've got Ukraine and Russia still in major conflict and at war. In fact, when I looked this up, they reckon there's over 32 ongoing conflicts in the world today, right now, ranging from drug wars, terrorist insurgencies, ethnic conflicts, and civil wars. And you know, there are many who have tried to come and to bring peace without that much success. And one organization was born at the end of World War II in 1945. Obviously, at that point there, after the Second World War, the nations were in ruins. And the world really wanted peace. And what happened is representatives of 50 different countries gathered together at the United Nations Conference in San Francisco. And over the next 2 months, they drafted and then signed what would become the UN Charter. And this organization, the UN, was to bring about world peace. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't done good things. But the challenge is that, sadly, there's actually not been one day, historians would say, where there's not been some sort of war that is happening across our planet. I want to say the absence of war is certainly some form of peace. But the biblical understanding of peace is much richer, it's much deeper than just the absence of war. Because actually the absence of war doesn't necessarily mean there's peace. Here we are in the United Kingdom. We're a country who are not specifically at war with anyone. But I want to ask you, do you think peace reigns in this country? Do you know, we seem to be suffering from pandemic levels of worry and anxiety and fear in this country. This is a country that's not at war directly with any other nation. You know, Christmas, here we are. It's touted as the season of joy and peace. But I want to ask, what's your house like at Christmas time? Over that Christmas period? Is it full of peace? Mine isn't. Interestingly, the first working Monday of the new year is known as National Divorce Day. How sad is that? Conflict with other nations? Maybe not. But conflict in our relationships means there is a lack of peace in many homes and in many people's experience of Christmas. So I want to ask you today, what is it for you personally that causes you anxiety or worry? Maybe for you, it's mountain debt that you see in your overdraft facility. Things are tight. You don't know how you're going to survive these next few months. Maybe for you, it's feeling out of control over your future. I know for many of those who are asylum seekers amongst us, you're relying on somebody else to make a decision about your future, where you live, where you reside, what country you get to live in, what city you live in. That can cause massive anxiety. Maybe for you, it's a health concern. Something that's been diagnosed or even something undiagnosed. And for others, it might be the worry of a relationship. Either the loneliness of not having that companion that you crave, or maybe it's the anxiety of not feeling like things are going well in your current relationships. Do you know, there are so many things that can cause us to be anxious and lose our peace. And as we look at all of these things, as we look at our nation, as we look at planet Earth, I think we recognize there's a real need for peace. And I think we need to ask a really difficult question, a genuine question. Has Jesus failed to be the Prince of Peace? Has he really brought peace to planet Earth? And you know what? If we judge Jesus based on how we might define in the world what peace looks like, we might have to say yes. But thankfully, I don't believe that. I believe true peace only comes from him. True peace is not just found in a ceasefire. True peace is not found in having a clean bill of health or a bank balance that is not in the red. True peace is only found in Jesus and who he was and what he has accomplished. You see, almost all anxiety and worry that we have is driven by some sort of conflict, either with people or with nature when it comes to health. It's also driven by the not being able to see or control what lies ahead. Most forms of anxiety or worry are under those two headings. Are we going to make it through another few months with our bills? What's the prognosis of our health condition? Am I going to be able to do this or this thing? But I want to say the reason there will always be wars on planet Earth and relational breakdowns and societies drowning in debt is because there's a much more serious conflict that needs dealing with. A broken relationship between God and man. A war between good and evil. An internal war. That means we're prone to choosing self in most situations. We want to be the makers of our own destiny, don't we? We want to look after number one. In fact, the Bible goes so far as to say that we in ourselves are hostile towards God because of our nature that instinctively wants to rebel against him. And the Bible calls this problem sin. That means we've messed up. It means we've missed the mark of holiness and perfection that God requires of us. And there's a consequence for that. And that consequence is death. And so here we have Jesus. This is the whole point. He comes to planet Earth as the Prince of Peace. He came to defeat sin and shame and death so that we could know him and be with him forever. And the power of this peace that he gives, the peace giver, has absolutely transformed us from the inside out. You see there, Ezekiel 36, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take that heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. Such is this problem, this conflict of sin, that he knew that we needed a new heart and a new spirit to see true change and true peace. Just as a little aside, on this title of the Prince of Peace, it's Sar Shalom in the Hebrew. And I think one of the challenges that we face in our culture is how we see this title. It's how we see our monarchy, actually. Actually, when we look at our monarchy, they don't really have any power or authority in our country. In fact, we're governed by a democratic parliament, aren't we? And so we can see this title as a little bit passive or weak. Okay? And I got some questions about it. Why does it use the term Prince of Peace as opposed to the King of Peace? Because surely it's the king that rules. The prince is to rule. Do you know, some commentators have suggested that in this passage there is some sort of clever mention of each of the Trinity in these titles. Counselor being the Holy Spirit, got Everlasting Father being God the Father, and the Prince of Peace being Jesus. But I have to be honest, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You see, Isaiah is referring to a coming baby king who will satisfy by himself, in and of himself, all of these names. And the word Sar, which is prince, is used over 400 times in the Hebrew Bible. And whilst it does sometimes refer to this term, this monarch term of prince, it's more often translated as commander or captain or chief. Okay? And I think it's a much more helpful picture for us as we think about this Prince of Peace. You see, the coming Messiah will not simply be a prince sitting on a throne, issuing royal decrees from a distance. Rather, he will be the commander who enters the battle himself, who directs heavenly hosts to bring about the end of the biggest conflict, the biggest war in our lives, once and for all. Do you know, while many expected a warrior king who would overthrow Israel's enemies, Christ, the commander of peace, came as the suffering servant who won the battle by laying down his life to defeat the great enemies of sin and death and evil. This is why he is like no other. You see, he's brought about a peace for mankind that is eternal. Not just for a season or a period or for an era. He's won the battle once and for all over death. And he's won that battle of separation from God for us. And you know, the impact of this victory that he has won for us is vast. Our very natures and our futures are transformed through this victory for eternity. But I want to say it doesn't end there. He's the commander of peace, which means the ripples or consequences of this peace can actually affect every area of our lives right now. We're not just expected to live with this life with a future hope of peace. When I die, I've got peace. In John 14:27, Jesus says to his disciples, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." You see, this peace that he gives is a gift to us. It's freely given, and it is amazing. And I want to tell you a little story. Many of you heard this, some of you won't. When I was 20, I was studying at Leeds, and I came home for the Easter, and I was really pale. I was pretty tired all the time, and my mum had said, "Look, you need to go to the doctors. I think there's obviously something not right. Maybe it's an overactive thyroid gland or something like that." So I was like, "Do you know what? My mum's asked me to go to the doctors. I'll go to the doctors." And I went along and I said to the doctor, "Look, my mum's sending me here. She thinks there's something wrong." And so he took a blood test. He said, "Look, there won't be anything wrong with you." I said, "Maybe it's anemia." He's like, "Look, you're a 20-year-old young man. You haven't got anemia." And I said, "Look, just do the test, you know. It'll satisfy my mum." Anyway, that night, he said, "You'll get your results in 2 weeks' time." That night, he calls me up at 11 o'clock at night. This is the doctor. On the same day that I'd got in to the GP surgery. And he says to me, "You've got an appointment at the hospital tomorrow. You do have anemia, and we need to find out why." So I went into hospital. I spent a day there having lots of tests. When I went in there, they thought it was leukemia by the blood results. They were fairly convinced, and they did the test for that. And then they went, "Oh, it's not leukemia." And I was like, yes. And after that first day, we left. And they said, "It's one of two conditions we think. It's either something called myelodysplastic syndrome or aplastic anemia." And I thought, great. I've heard the word anemia. I'll take some iron pills. It will all be okay. And that's what I left the hospital thinking. And I got home, and I just needed to chill and watch some TV. And at this point, the internet had just come out, by the way. So you'd log on. It would take you about 20 minutes to actually get logged on. There wasn't huge amounts online either. And my mum decided to go and check out these two conditions online. And after about 3 hours, when she'd actually managed to get those pages up, she said, "Chris, you need to come and see this." And so I went upstairs, and I looked at the computer, and it says, "Myelodysplastic syndrome is an incurable cancer. You have less than 18 months to live." I thought, whew, don't want that one. And then it says aplastic anemia. You've got 18 months to live, unless you can get a bone marrow transplant. I was like, where's the good options here? There's no good option here. And I remember going to bed that night, and unsurprisingly, I couldn't sleep. There was a lack of peace. And I was worried. I was anxious about my future. What were they going to find? And I came downstairs, got into my living room, and I just started crying, praying out to God. I didn't know what to do. To be honest, I was quite new to coming back to God, and I had my Bible there, and I was crying out, and I said, "God, you're going to have to speak to me. I don't know what to do." And I open my Bible, and we never suggest, just open your Bible and see what God does, but he can do. That's the beautiful thing about God. He can work in whatever way he wants. And I opened this Bible, I was just in tears, just tears streaming down my cheeks. This was probably like 2 o'clock in the morning. And it opened on Philippians 4. And it says, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. And boom, this tangible peace just came on me. I went from anxious crying to, it's going to be okay. That was the impact of this peace. It was so tangible. And you know what? I was able to go to bed that night and I was able to sleep soundly, praise God. But the news I had received, it ended up being aplastic anemia, the news that I'd received as a 20-year-old was devastating for me. But the peace I experienced in the midst of this storm was absolutely beautiful. And it changed me. And the funny thing is, none of my circumstances had changed in that room that night. I didn't know what lay ahead for me. Was I going to make it past the next year? Would I be able to go back to university? Lots of different questions going through my head. But all of these questions were still up in the air. But I'd experienced God. I'd tasted of him. And I was ruined for anything else. But I have to be honest. I've needed to call on his peace for many situations in my life. When I had chemo 14 years ago, or kidney cancer 4 years ago, just waiting to hear a test result from a scan can be difficult. I needed to call on his manifest presence, his peace. When my family's been ill, or I almost lost the business that I was running, I needed to call on his peace. And the honest truth is that in all of my most troubled times, there is a lack of being able to control the narrative. The circumstances seem out of my hands, out of my ability to control things. But my peace only comes from him. And I was just thinking, what do I do when I find that I'm struggling with a lack of peace? Because we all have it happen to us, okay? Even now, it happens. It can even happen when there's nothing wrong. You notice that? Not everything's going well, but there's something just causing a lack of peace. So what do? First thing I do is I stop. And I ask God, where am I not trusting in Jesus? Jesus' power for this situation. I try and identify what is causing this lack of peace. Where am I not trusting him for this? What is it that's causing this? I find it helpful then just to dwell on him. Dwell on his power, his goodness, his promises for me. And I speak them over my circumstances. And I find it helpful to stop and pray. I often turn to Philippians 4. And I pray for his manifest presence, his peace to come on me. I just want to say Jesus is the peace that we all need in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. And I'm not trying to be glib here. I understand there are things going on in people's lives, but I just want to help you to think about, how do I respond when I'm struggling with anxiety or worry? So I just want to say, if your worry or anxiety today comes from sickness, or maybe it's mental health challenges, I want to remind you that he is the healer. He is able to heal you. If your worry comes from loneliness, then I want to remind you that he is Emmanuel. He is God with us. He will never leave you. And he is enough. He's gone to great lengths to spend eternity with you because he loves you. And just to say, he sees all of our desires and he knows what we need. If your worry comes from provision and financial anxiety, God is Jehovah Jireh. He says that he will give us everything that we need. And I just want to say he's provided a family. It's a church. It's a church family where believers are to look out and to care for each other's needs. And if your worry is relational breakdown, he would say he is a God of restoration. He can change our hearts, our motives, our situations in an instant. Okay? I just want to caveat this. Is that working? Just flick that next one. I just want to caveat this with one tension. Okay? We live in a kingdom come era, but not yet fully come. It means that Jesus has defeated death and sickness and sin, but until he returns, we have to live in what can feel like a tension. A tension where he has done it. He has defeated the power of sickness, and yet not all sickness is healed. We live in a tension that God has defeated the power of sin in our lives, and yet we still mess up and are still attracted by all it appears to offer. Phil mentioned it this morning. In Revelation, we get a picture of our eternal destiny, where the kingdom will have fully come. And it looks like this. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things have passed away. This is a picture of the kingdom that we are going to be part of. It's a picture of what this kingdom of planet Earth can look like. It's come. Jesus has ushered in this kingdom, but it's not yet fully come. One final thing. His peace has not only won the biggest battle that we have ever faced in our lives. His peace is not only available to us today for the situations that we face, but we also get the privilege of being peacemakers. Sorry, you can't see that top one. It's Matthew 5. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. As Christians, we're actually called not to be troublemakers, okay? It's not what the church is here for. It can sometimes feel like that, can't it? I don't know. We're called to be peacemakers. We're an army of peacemakers under the authority of the chief, the commander of peace. And we get to bring him, the Prince of Peace, to others. But to do that, we need to first learn to live under his reign and rule of peace. And so I just want to remind you of this passage again. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. This is the beautiful gospel of the Prince of Peace. This is what we're celebrating at Christmas time. And I want us to respond. Guys in worship, do you want to come back up? For you, you may not know Jesus this morning. You may not have given your life to the Prince of Peace. And there's a battle that's raging inside of you. And for you, you can respond this morning by asking the Prince of Peace to come and to change you, transform your very heart. Okay? And that is the light. And we want to give you an opportunity to do that this morning. Mm-hmm. But others, I'm sure you've identified, because we all have them, areas of our lives where we're struggling to find his peace. It's a free gift that he wants to come. He wants to manifest his presence amongst us this morning. He's accomplished something, the greatest act in history, but it's not just something over there that we get to look at. He wants us to experience it. Experience him. Experience his peace this morning.